Hi, Alchemists, and welcome back to another episode of Elemental Educator. I'm your host, Tyler, and if you're joining us for the first time, thank you so very much for tuning in, and welcome to a place where we redefine leadership and challenge the status quo. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe to Elemental Educator on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast from, and check out our website, elementaleducator.com. I can't wait to unpack growth mindsets and teacher sustainability with Tim, host of the Teachers on Fire podcast. So get ready to let the alchemy of education ignite your passion for learning.
This is the Elemental Educator, the podcast where we kindle the fires of dialogue with the alchemists of education. We're here to embark on a journey where ancient wisdom meets the contemporary world of education. On Elemental Educator, we dive into the deep waters of adaptability, feel the grounding earth of core values, ride the swift winds of change, and ignite the fiery spirit of risk-taking. Fire, earth, wind, water. This is the Elemental Educator, and now your host, Tyler Como.
Hello and welcome to the Elemental Educator podcast. I'm your host, Tyler, and today we have a special guest who embodies the spirit of innovation and continuous improvement in the classroom. Joining us is Tim Cavey, the host of the highly acclaimed podcast Teachers on Fire. Tim is an expert in elementary technology with a wealth of knowledge in graphic design, photo and video editing, and coding. His insights into assessment practices are invaluable, and he brings a passion for teachers' sustainability and incremental growth to everything he does. Tim's work not only highlights cutting-edge educational technology, but also focuses on practical strategies that teachers can implement to enhance their teaching practices and foster a sustainable work-life balance. We are thrilled to have him here to share his experiences and expertise. Tim, welcome to the Elemental Educator podcast. It's such a pleasure to have you.
The pleasure is all mine. Thank you so much for inviting me on, Tyler.
And I'm excited to unpack what you have to offer. I think that this is going to be very meaningful to all of our listeners and get some exposure to them on the Teachers on Fire podcast. And I get to join you and hopefully return the favor, and just looking forward to some really good conversations.
Likewise. Yeah, it'll be great to have you on over on my show as well.
So I want to get into the nitty gritty right away. I want to start by just figuring out, how did you get to where you are now?
So I am in my 23rd of teaching. I've taught in Winnipeg, Vancouver, Burnaby, and Surrey, BC. The last three are, of course, BC. And I've got a lot of different experiences under my belt now, a lot of them featuring into the middle school world. Some high school and some elementary, but most right in the sort of grade, let's say 5 through 9. And so that's where a lot of my experience comes. I always say a transformative period for me was in about 2017 when I began a Master's of Educational Leadership program at VIU in Nanaimo. I read Mindset by Carol Dweck, and that book and so much more in the program really set me on fire, if you'll allow the pun. I really became re-energized for education, for teaching, for leadership. And of course, it was during that time, too, that I decided to start the Teachers on Fire podcast. And then that became a part of my thesis in year 2 of my master's degree. I really seized on this idea of growth as something that is virtually guaranteed. And so that's the mindset that I began the podcast with, just this idea that, you know what, I'm going to be terrible at this at the beginning, and I'm not going to know very much, but I'm just going to go. And with the repetitions comes confidence and competence, even if you do experience failures along the way. So I think I've modeled that on the podcast, and I try to bring that into my teaching practice as well.
That's awesome. And just like Teachers on Fire, the fire element that I speak to is that spark, that ignition point that drives our decision making. It's where we take our risks, and it's where we root our risks. So I want to jump back to the risk that you took when you decided to jump into your master's of educational leadership. What was that rooted in? So where was the decision from to, hey, I'm going to pursue this?
I was feeling a certain amount of restlessness, I would say. And we go through chapters and periods in our education journey where you feel a bit of a stirring for a new challenge. I always think that teachers shouldn't be in the exact same role for more than 7 years. So whatever year that was in my practice, my 17th year or so, 16th, 17th year, I really felt a stirring to take another step. in my learning journey, and did have a desire too to influence change and to start to move into admin. And I think just needed something different. I wanted to some more learning and be energized in a new way. And so that was a risk, but I would say an even larger risk was the podcast. I don't want to bring it back to that, but both of them happened in the same period, and I was just ready. Let's say I was just ready due to a combination of forces in my professional and personal life. I was ready for a change.
Now, you made a point that ready for a change and taking the risk, you could have walked away from teaching and education and gone any other route you wanted to go. Why did you choose for that risk to stay within the educational realm?
Great question. I think I was still comfortable in education. It wasn't like I was completely disillusioned at the time. I was just looking for a next step. And so I still believe in the power of education and will for the foreseeable future, or at least for the next, let's say, 5-year period or so. There wasn't another career track or professional journey that was really calling my name in the same way. I don't think that was really a thought process or a decision that I spent a lot of time on. I always say my next choice, if I could go all the way back to the beginning, another career track that would really appeal to me would be a realtor, becoming a realtor, which feels very different, but it makes use, from what I can see, it makes use of a lot of the skills and the passions that I'm interested in. But no, at the time it was education all the way.
Now I know what the background will be when we put the video out there. It's just going to be a bunch of different houses that come around that maybe you can pitch for one day and we'll see where they go.
That's right.
I'm trying to get to the point of your earth and what you're grounded in and where we wanted to take it and really root to, okay, so we got into education and then we got into leadership and then we got into the Teachers on Fire podcast and this entire platform. You have a route for your own personal growth and development in it. Is there a route for the people that you're delivering these messages to?
I know we'll talk more about this, but when I was thinking about Earth, and you make the connection between Earth and your core values here on the show, and I was thinking about, okay, what are my core values? What's my educational philosophy? And I think since that period, certainly it's really been a focus on growth mindset. I mentioned that. This idea of consistent daily steps toward growth. And I think that's such a comfort to any student. Locked onto the idea, and I realize it's become an important part of my philosophy, that it's through creative work and creative activities that we do the most learning, when we're actually engaged. And
Absolutely.
so I can think of a lot of illustrations of that. But one simple one is that as a teacher, there's never a moment where you will do more meaningful learning than when you have to present to a room full of teachers. And that will really force you like nothing else to dig into your content and make sure you understand every aspect of it. So creative work, I see, is a big key. Try to bring that into the classroom, of course.
Yeah, you're there. I guess I want to know, why do you care to do that for others instead of just yourself?
Oh, it's so exciting. It's just so exciting to see students shake off labels. So when you read Mindset by Carol Dweck, I'm sure a lot of your listeners have, you realize that a very common label that people adopt is I'm a math person or I'm not a math person. Another one is I'm a creative person or I'm not a creative person. These labels are both so negative. They keep us in boxes, and students adopt them too. Students learn really early on, oh, I'm a this person, I'm not a that person. And to see students push those boundaries I think it's right at the heart of education. It's the heart of everything we do.
And that's what I was trying to unpack. And there we go. The earth element is coming through. And it taps back to everything you've talked about at the start around growth. You're very rooted in the idea of not just growth for yourself, but letting everybody around you grow.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very powerful thing that we're going to start to unpack here right away. One of the things, though, we'll shift a little bit is you talk about teacher sustainability, and it's a key focus for you. And I want to bring the earth into it, because I believe there are some core values that are essential for maintaining healthy work-life balance when it comes to this. What kind of message do you push out to people around that?
Okay, look out, Tyler, because I love to preach on this and I get fired up, but I'll share some principles and try to keep this somewhat succinct. So creating digital distance, you alluded to it there. I keep my phone out of the bedroom on school nights, and I keep my phone on do not disturb 24/7 so I don't get vibrations and notifications and rings. I'm a very hard person to call directly unless you're in my favorites list. For me, digital distance is important. That's one key. Two, stepping away. I think teachers and educators need to practice and feel the permission to step right away from work and work email and work related activities for a good 24 to 48 hours on the weekend. I also encourage educators not to check their work email right before bed. I think you need to be able to say no when you need to. Sometimes you're asked around schools to, hey, coach this team, start this club, help us out with this event. And if there's something inside you that wants to say no, you need to listen to that. I discovered that actually it took me a long time to really come to grips with this. But when you say no to that commitment and you actually don't want to be there and you resent it right from the beginning, that is a great key, a great way to experience burnout. So saying no is really important. Fourth one is aiming for good enough or accepting good enough. Now, that doesn't sound like a teacher on fire, but what I've realized is that there's always a better job we can do as a teacher. We can always make this project a little bit better. We can always make our bulletin board a little bit more amazing. We can always decorate the halls and prepare for this major week of themed learning just a little bit more. But we need to be able to draw the line and say, I've been here long enough. I'm tired. Students are going to learn. And I guess find comfort in the fact that students resonate with connection. We can always be a connected educator. And what I mean by that is you're going to be a little bit more meaningful, a little bit more generous with the smiles and conversation if you're coming off 8 hours sleep than if you worked really hard, but maybe too long on something the night before and you're short on sleep. Number 5, assessment. I think we have to be selective and strategic about what we assess, what we provide feedback on. And by that, we need to shake this idea or this notion that we have to mark everything students do. That is unacceptable. It's a dated idea, and we shouldn't be carrying that guilt. And then a sixth one is we need to build in rewards in our personal or professional life, rewards for ourselves that we can look forward to. And a tradition my wife and I have started for the last 2 or 3 years, she's not an educator, but she's very supportive, is that we book a few days at a ski village here in BC near Vancouver, and we put it right at the end of the school year. And I can tell you, Tyler, June is always a crazy month, but I look forward to that getaway so much in a nice hotel in Whistler. And I know that there's going to be a lot of good activities that happen there. And that's something that I can look forward to. I think teachers that have nothing to look forward to start to lose hope. So those ideas resonate with your listeners and give them maybe one thing in that mix to think about.
I think they absolutely do. And as you were talking, one of the things that actually resonated with me was I was a part of some professional development yesterday, and there was a literacy specialist coming in and talking to us. And I hate the message that she said,
Oh, no.
but it applied so well to the context she was saying it in that I loved it. And her message was to stay in your lane. And she was referencing teaching elementary literacy, staying in your lane around what you need kids to know at certain ages. For context, she talked about you don't need to take a kid in kindergarten and get them going into grade 1 fully reading. They need to know how to recognize capital and lowercase letters. And so staying in our lane prevents the exhaustion on ourselves from constantly trying to get in there and push all of these things upon kids, where we need to focus on the holistic side of it and making sure every kid can go to that next level ready. And yeah, of course, we can work on the high achieving kids and try to close gaps on the low achieving, but you have to know how to stay in your lane within that. And that, when you were talking about setting those boundaries, putting the phone away, making sure that you're not responding to emails, which a lot of us are really bad at doing as well, all I could think of was that message of staying in your lane. I want to prod a little bit here. This is a great message for teachers to turn off those devices, to make those plans. How does that correlate or translate, to school leaders or central office members who they are given that division phone for a reason and it's to answer when needed? How do they create that balance when they're a 24/7 need to be available for the people they're serving?
It's tough and it's a fine line. You're absolutely right. In my building, I'm actually the point person in the mornings for our substitute teachers. And occasionally, I don't know what things are like in your area, but occasionally we are short substitutes. Is really challenging. My school's in Vancouver, and a lot of people, if you think about what substitute teachers earn, it's not the greatest, and it's not as good as a teacher's salary. I know teachers are paid pretty well in Alberta, so for you, but for substitute teachers, there's not many that necessarily live right in the city of Vancouver, and so that complicates things. Anyway, the where I was going with that, into your question, is I need to be reachable, and for that matter, I need to know to that point, I need to know the times when I need to be checking my text messages. That's really my number one thing. Our staff team connects through text messages and through Google Chat. We're a Google school, so Google Chat is used a lot as well. So as long as I'm keeping an eye on those, I'll add WhatsApp. There's the odd WhatsApp thread that gets mixed in there, but as long as I am present and checking those things at the key times when I need to be, and then on what it looks like in my context, again, is through the day, I'm available on Google Chat. I've got it right lined up in my email, and I'm close by. Of course, I've got the phone by my desk. So I need to make, to your point, great question. I need to make sure I am available as a building leader, as a vice principal throughout the day and during key times. But for the most part, yeah, as I said earlier, I just respond to messages. I'll make a note if someone calls me, but at least I'm going to my phone. Here's the key. I'm going to my device on my terms and when I want to, and I'm not being pulled away at all times of the day due to whatever notification or message that might come my way.
And the message that I would add to that is if you're proactive and you believe in transparency and you're leading with your heart and you're building strong connections, your phone's going to ring a lot less. It's going to go off a lot less
Mm-hmm.
because you're setting people up for success and you're not just becoming the problem solver for everybody.
Right.
You mentioned something strong as well, and that was the idea of going into summer needing to be excited. I wish I could be going to Whistler in the summer. Instead, we're getting ready for kid number 2, and we'll see where that takes us.
Hey, congrats.
Yeah, so thank you. How do you keep the fire of passion for teaching and learning alive in your career? Because you said, I'm excited for summer ends, people come back to school, Christmas break comes, people come back to school. How do we keep that burning within us?
I've got some different answers for you on this. Number one is Teachers on Fire. Just like you, I've got this podcast that I really love. I connect with educators regularly once a week. Every Saturday morning is my sweet spot. And I engage in conversations about learning. So those conversations continue to light my fire. There's a lot of other things that I do in my personal life, like some regular habits that we might mention later in this conversation. One of them is daily reading. I'm not the best or biggest reader in the world, but I do try to check in with my Kindle every night when I go to sleep as part of that sleep routine. And then I also build in a lot of offline activities in the summer. So yes, I love to create. By the way, I've got two stepsons who are the younger one is graduating right now. So I know I am in a very different category than educators with small children, but I like to think I engage in a healthy mix of digital content creation. Love that. That includes video and podcasts and writing. But I also do a lot of offline stuff, and that includes hiking and paddleboarding and flying my drone and traveling and doing what I can in that respect as well. And those offline things are such a joy. You live in a beautiful part of the world as well. We get outside, we get to enjoy here in Canada the very best that this land has to offer. And I just find that I come back in September and I've had a summer, maybe 6 weeks, if for me as an administrator, 6 to 7 weeks of outdoor adventures. And those are fresh in my mind and they really add to my fire coming back. So it's a mix, but that's what it boils down to for me.
So it's all the bucket fillers in between that we get to look forward to. Now, as a leader,
Yeah.
sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, hopefully it's not just the experiences in between. Hopefully there are activities within teaching, within schools that are also lighting our fires. But as I think your question originally was about the summer. That's how I would answer it in terms of the summer, at least.
For sure. From a leadership perspective, a teacher in front of their kids, a vice principal in front of their staff, how are you keeping that fire lit for the people that you oversee?
So a lot of the same things I mentioned, trying to do daily reading in my Kindle, engaging in this podcast through the school year, trying to stay connected with fresh ideas. I'm pretty active on X and LinkedIn right now. Those are the places that I like to check in school, after school, and just hear what other educators are talking about. Of course, there are educators in our own buildings too that at various times of the year are going to be on fire and have a lot to offer. I say that a bit of an asterisk because I'm very mindful that right now at the end of June, a lot of our colleagues, let's face it, are exhausted and just focused on the
It's a
finish line.
different fire.
It's a different fire.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think those are the key activities that I try to stay connected to.
And you mentioned that one of the practices you take upon yourself is trying your best to at least read every night. Are there other practices that you implement in your teaching leadership routine that keep you grounded back to the philosophy we talked about at the start?
Something that I wish I could say right here is writing. So I think writing and the reflective process that I associate with writing is something that I aspire to do weekly. If you look at my blog posts, I'm in a bit of a drought, and I think there's just some fatigue and some limitations that have fallen upon me, but I will get back to it in the summer. And that for me is, yes, it's a form of digital content creation, but when we write about our practice, we become a little bit more deeply reflective in a way that maybe doesn't happen when you're creating a video or a podcast. So I think that's an important piece for me as well.
I keep thinking back to my session that I had yesterday. I guess it would have been a couple days ago. On 2 days ago, we would have had this session because we came up with two non-negotiables that need to happen in every room, no matter where you are in any school. And it was daily writing and daily reading. And for you to come out and say these are the two things that you're focusing on, it's living proof that it puts you in a good spot because here you are modeling that not only for staff that you're around, but for kids that you're around and for other educators around. There is such a benefit to daily reading and daily writing. And we instill that in all of the kids that we try to work with. But we also need to live by that too, because it can really help us grow.
Right.
And that's where I want to take it next here is we're coming back from that fire that we're pushing on people, being rooted in that earth of incremental growth. And it's a theme that you emphasize. So how do you encourage that mindset of incremental growth and continuous improvement amongst your staff and your students?
Yeah, so I think, and I'm going to go back to a comment you made in passing a moment ago that as educators, we want to be doing those things. It's really difficult to make teachers do a lot of writing. Something that I've heard George Couros talk about is using professional learning times to actually devote some time in that window in the day or whatever it happens to be to doing some reflective writing. And I think that's really the best case scenario for teachers to have that time embedded in professional learning. To answer your question though, with students, I think we want to build in those practices that we're all doing, things like think, pair, share. We want to make a part of our normal classroom culture. I teach a course here in BC that is called ADST, Applied Design Skills and Technologies. And the focus of the curriculum, if you look up the curriculum, is actually design thinking and the steps of the design process. So we've got ideation and understanding our audience and users and prototyping. And then as part of the iteration process, we collect feedback from peers. And that's so important. And I try to build it into the different creative work, creative activities that we're doing with students and just make that a part of our culture. And I'll be honest, sometimes it slips or we might forget here or there, but we want to make that a normal part of almost everything that we do is inviting feedback. As long as it is creative, I realize it's not going to be a fit with everything we're doing. So that same thinking, that same design process fits with English, it fits in other areas. And I think it's, to get to your point about collaboration, I think that has to be key in all of our classrooms, that we're just building in that culture that we check in with peers, we get their feedback. And students are perceptive. Students are going to think of things for each other that as the teacher, we can't scale. Number one, we can't scale our feedback times 25 or 30 at a time. And two, they're going to see things that we don't see right away. So I try to build that into my ADST classes as much as I can as well.
Thank you for sharing. And you're absolutely right. Collaboration is crucial. I want to come back to collaboration here. This earth of growth, igniting our fire and passion. These are awesome. But now what we're getting into is the water element and how we navigate change and face change and adversity together. And that is done through a collaborative mindset. How do you foster that collaborative environment in your classrooms, especially when you're working on?
So I have a great example
projects
of this, and it's something that I'm celebrating as a win from this year. A lot of teachers across North America use iMovie or iPad's iMovie in their classrooms for students and small groups of students to create video projects. I came into this year already a big Canva fan, but I was determined that in my elementary classes that I was going to use Canva as the go-to video editor. And it was more than a win. It was a huge success for lots of reasons that I can get into. But the number one thing that I wanted to mention here is that Canva allows students to collaborate on video projects in real time, Google Docs style. They can see where all of their partners are. And so now instead of having one student editing in iMovie on an iPad while two or three other students look on or probably get bored or distracted, and there's really only one person in a group doing editing at the time, now they're all involved. And so I just completed some video projects in grade 7. I was just so pleased by the level of engagement and collaboration. And I know there are other solutions out there, but the thing I love about Canva is that we are a Google Chromebook school. And so Canva is a cloud-based solution. Of course, it doesn't require any downloads. And so in terms of collaboration, I know I'm probably going more micro than you were looking for, but that was one example of.
This is a great example of it. Now, and my experience with Canva is it's incredible. Have an upgraded version, but I do believe that the features you're talking about are available in the
Well,
free version
and by
as well.
free, I hope you mean Canva for education. So I'll just say for your listeners that Canva offers essentially premium
Yes.
level access to all educators and students. So if you are someone listening to this podcast and you haven't yet connected with that at your school, or you're hitting paywalls within Canva, you shouldn't be. And you should be able to connect with their free service. When I talk to educators from other schools, what I hear is the process has become a little bit more, I don't want to say difficult in a sense that discourages anyone. They're trying to be careful about who they give access to, but the offer is still there, free for schools.
And I'm going to just piggyback off of that and speak specifically to Alberta as well about things we might not know about. If you're in Alberta, your government pays for an A3 license to Microsoft, meaning that you get all of the suites for free and you get access to Minecraft education for free. And there are so many powerful tools that you can be doing through Minecraft education on your school Chromebooks that will function and run with them. Speaking from experience, it's an incredible thing to get students engaged and immersed in technology. And that's where I want to take this too. So we're talking collaborative mindsets, and you mentioned the use of technology. With your experience, can you share maybe a different experience than this Canva one around a risk in implementing something you took? And then what was your collaborative
So I'll
spaces?
answer that from a Google school perspective. And the very first thing that we do is create Google Classrooms. It sounds like you are in a Microsoft environment, so I know you're in team. Oh,
No,
okay.
we're Google as well.
Okay.
I was
All
just
right.
sharing that for the
So
listeners. Yeah.
in a Google school, it looks like Classrooms. In Microsoft, it looks like Teams. And that brings everyone together in the same digital space. Of course, part of this answer too depends on grade level, right, Tyler? So in my school, sixth graders get their own one-to-one Chromebook. Fifth graders have access to them, but they're held in sort of common areas. And then younger students wouldn't have the same level of access. But to me, that's where it begins. And then in terms of collaboration, and I'll add communication to that, I think a lot of great things can happen within Google Classroom. I think some of the quick question features are underutilized by teachers. So teachers can post quick questions that allow students to respond and then see each other's responses and respond to each other's responses. So there's a lot of good stuff and good energy that can happen right there inside Classroom. And then, of course, private comments with teachers are so effective. There's lots of different things that you can do inside of the private comment space and things that you can request, like URLs or feedback that you can give. And of course, you have to be careful not to end up putting those private comments up on the screen. But yeah, one thing I'll say on that note that I don't like, we've talked about Canva, is that students can, within Canva, they make it very tempting for students to share their design with teachers. But what that does, if they use the share with teacher button or operation there, is that it sends me, the teacher, an individual email with a link that now I have to click into and visit. Now I'm opening Canva in a new tab, and the whole thing might sound simple, but when you multiply that by dozens, or in my case, 200 students, that is way too time consuming. So on that note, if this matters to anyone listening, what I encourage my students to do if they're creating any sort of a design in Canva is to download the file as a PNG or PDF, PNG preferably, and then post that in Google Classroom. And then I can see everyone's work. I see that preview and it opens a whole lot quicker. So hopefully that little hack is helpful. But I think getting back to your question, yeah, the very first thing in a Google environment to me starts at Google Classroom.
Very fair. And creating that strong collaboration, it builds collective efficacy. And then all of a sudden, engagement, improved expectations, improved learning happening. And you actually, as a result, get kids that can become more creative, more innovative, and you start to ignite that fire and see that passion, not just in the teacher, but in the kids that are now excited to do the things they're doing. I'm excited. We haven't used Canva, so I'm going to go back and try Canva. I mainly have my
Okay.
kids work through CapCut, and CapCut doesn't do the live editing that you're referring to. They do have a cloud-based system as well, but we have invested in some tech that enables us to download the desktop version, which has a little bit more, but again, you lose the cloud-based collaboration, and that is something very powerful. So we might look at making a shift
Yeah,
and bringing
I don't
that
want to make this
together.
the Canva episode
Now,
by any means, and not sponsored, by the way. I have no affiliation.
so yeah, another background for you, the
But I'll just
Canva. Yeah,
throw
there
in
we
there
go.
that Canva
So
has an incredible stock library. I don't know what that looks like inside CapCut, but incredible stock library.
yeah.
If a student is doing a video on giraffes, like there are going to be 20, 30 giraffe videos, right? And then audio elements, and of course, all the graphic designs are there. So there's just a real wealth of stuff that students can add to their projects.
Yeah, it's an incredible platform. And if you're not using it in
Right.
education, you should be using it in education. One, because it's free, but two, because it's
Mhm.
so easy to navigate. It's made some
Mhm.
huge strides in their improvement. Again, not a Canva plug, but a little bit of a Canva plug. Canva, if you're listening, please sponsor this podcast episode. I want to jump to some of maybe the deeper thought questions here. What are you hoping that listeners start actioning in their
Well,
lives
I
more of?
hope the idea of growth mindset and shedding labels resonates with listeners. And I know it's a message that we've been hearing for the last 5 years, and perhaps some people are tired of it. But I think the idea, going back to the design process and the world of teaching that I'm in, the idea that with every iteration and repetition comes opportunity for growth, that we don't just try an activity for the first time and just say, oh, I suck at this, I'm going to move on, I quit. Some of our students want to respond that way. We see that kind of response sometimes. And we need to make sure we're not modeling the negative side of that as teachers. Sometimes we get up in front of a room and we make a comment like, oh, I'm not an artist. If you think about that for a moment, we don't accept that from our students, right? We don't accept a student saying, I'm not a math person, and they just close their whatever it is and walk away. So I hope we're modeling that. A great video on this is Austin's Butterfly. That may be that little clip that's about 9 minutes long, something like that, might be the most powerful video in education, if I can add that exclamation mark. So Austin's Butterfly. And I think there are other things that we can do around our buildings. One thing I try to do is share a quote of the week on TV screens and on Google Classroom, other places that have some of this idea embedded within them. And I always put it beside one of our great a student picture that was taken around the building recently. But a quote from this past week is, or was, the quality of our lives often depends on the quality of our habits. And that comes from James Clear. So just things like that I try to do to add to our culture.
Speaking of habits, if you haven't read The 7 Habits, I highly recommend it. It's really set me up for success. It's set a lot of people I know up for success. It's got a very powerful message within it. Your statement on what you think you can do or not, though, I just finished a podcast recording with Curtis Hewson from Jigsaw, and he mentioned a quote from Henry Ford, which is, if you think you can do a thing or you think you can't do a thing, you're right. That mindset of belief that you're putting in for yourself, that you're showing others, it is so powerful, because positive self-talk and that encouragement and that belief is
Right.
crucial to our own growth. And boy, does that ever resonate with me. Now, Tim, I'm curious, what does your future look
I
like?
can see myself in education. I think I said earlier, at least for the next 5 years or so. I'm 45 right now. I dream of retiring by 50. And I think at that time, my learning and my education work will continue, but I'm getting more connected with spaces like this one, with content creation, and not just in education, but in other areas as well. So that's attracting my interest. I still have a lot of passion and fire for education right now. And so, in terms of the future, I love my current space, maybe is another way to answer that too. So, I get to be a vice principal and teacher, 35% teacher, 65 vice principal in my current context. And so, I get to learn the names of about 250 students in total, interact with them on a weekly basis, and really enjoying that. So, I don't really have aspirations right now to become a principal of another school, but we'll see. Never say never.
That is one of the things that I actually love in my role as a principal still is we're a small rural school, and so I still have a lot of teaching time, and I would
Mm.
really struggle to give up the teaching time because that's where I feel I see the tangible impact of growth, which brings me to one of my last questions here is what advice would you give to anyone listening that struggles with personal growth and getting that
Yeah, I
first foot
think
forward?
if you're stalled a little bit, if you are struggling to move forward or take that next step, I think plugging into positive voices is really important. So I know some people have a resistance to self help and productivity and that kind of wellness literature or media, but I think whatever that looks like for you, whether it's one of the social media platforms or a new type of reading or your local church community or whatever that looks like, making sure that you've got positive voices in your world that are speaking into you, that are engaging your thinking is really important. You talk about a rural school, and sometimes I'm sure your school is very different than this. But I think sometimes for rural schools, the challenge is maybe you're living in a bit of I don't want to say a bubble, and I hope this lands the right way, but your sphere of contact, let's say, is a little bit limited. So I think in that sense, it's really healthy to make sure you're connecting online with other teaching or education communities, and you model that so well. And I think another thing I would add too is it's helpful to zoom out on your life. One thing and I'll say consider other options as you're doing that. So one story that I've come across on my podcast, and I'm sure you have as well, is that for some teachers who are starting to stall or burn out or lose their fire, it can be really helpful to just zoom out for a moment, consider other options, say, maybe, maybe a change of scenery might be the key for me. I've heard that story a number of times where teachers move to a different context, maybe a different position, different look, and just that change of scenery is really revitalizing. A lot of teachers are great learners, committed learners. And so just the challenge of learning about a new space, new content, new students, new colleagues can be really energizing. So I'll throw that out there as an option as well.
It's nice to hear it did land well what you said about rural schools. You're right. We are limited in what we have access to immediately around us, and that can sometimes be a deterrent from people wanting to come to a rural school. So engaging in the digital world is so important for these small places because you only need one person to be engaged in a digital world and they can engage with so many other people. That's why our school invested heavily into next year to start up an esport program and to get into the digital coding and software design so that we can reach out and connect with
Cool.
everybody we want to connect with. And we only need one kid to do it to
Nice.
start with. So it's very powerful. Tim, how can our
The
listeners get
best
in touch
place to
with you?
go is at Teachers on Fire on YouTube. So just look for the Teachers on Fire YouTube channel. You can also find me at Teachers on Fire on virtually any other social media platform.
This has been such a nice time to just sit down, connect, have a great conversation. Can't wait for July to come where I get to join you again and have another powerful conversation. Tim, thank
Thanks
you
for
so much
having
for
me,
joining me on
Tyler.
this
And
episode.
yeah, I'm looking forward to that conversation as well.
You've been listening to the Elemental Educator. Our aim is to illuminate optimal educational practices on a global scale. And second, we want to shine a light on the expertise and knowledge that Tyler brings to educational institutions. He's not just a talking head. He's a practicing educator, a school principal, armed with a master's in educational administration, and on the brink of completing his doctorate. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, find us on Instagram, Facebook, and X at Elemental Educator. And to contact us, fire off an email. See what I did there? Fire off. Okay. Send an email to elementaleducator@gmail.com. See you next time on the Elemental Educator.